So at long last, we are here with the introduction of Absolute Clayface in the Absolute Batman comics. And people have been dying for this for quite some time. And it makes sense because Clayface is dope. So this whole introduction for Clayface starts with the Batman project. Because keep in mind, one of the things that had happened here is that Bruce Wayne had been put onto the idea by Absolute Scarecrow that basically every moment of his life, seemingly going back to his birth, but most definitely from the death of his father at the zoo, all the way until the time that he became Batman, seemed to be engineered for the purpose of making sure Bruce became Batman, a decades-long plan. Now, we don't know how accurate this statement is, but Bruce thinks it's true, because Bruce is going through and looking at like all these little newspaper clippings and pieces of information that seem to put Absolute Scarecrow and Absolute Joker in the same place at the same time in so many different locations, right? They work together effectively. That's why he says things like taken at arc D, right? Does D stand for dread? Is it a possible site? He says plus increased Crow flight paths through Venezuela. So it could all point to the idea that Scarecrow and Joker are working together and the conspiracy is real. Right? And so what ends up happening in the midst of all of this is that the other friends that Bruce has show up here, specifically Killer Croc, Two-Face, Riddler, and Penguin. Now, one of the things to notice is they're kind of falling more in line with the variations of the characters that we know. And they've been doing that for a little while, but if you didn't catch it, if you never actually read that particular moment, they are the way they are because of Bane, with the exception of Waylon Jones. Waylon Jones is actually kidnapped, taken to Arc M, and then transformed into Killer Croc. But Harvey Dent, right, one half of his face was burned by Bane, Riddler literally had his brain smashed in, and Penguin had every bone in his body broken, crumpled up like a piece of paper. But that's the kicker here, is because where they were all ready to kind of split, except for Waylon Jones, kind of going down their own paths, blaming Bruce Wayne for everything that had happened, because keep in mind, Batman kicked the hornet's nest. He's the one that kind of brought all this down on them in the first place, that Waylon Jones rallied them together and said, look, we all grew up as friends. So the reality is we cannot abandon each other in a time of need. We all need each other, and Bruce Wayne needs us, right? And so that's why he says, right, Bruce, we're all here. And when Bruce turns around and sees Waylon and everybody else, he just says, I told you to stay away. And they react about as well as you would expect them to, in the sense that there are some snarky comments that come from them, but really it all just kind of comes down to the fact that Waylon Jones reminded us that we're all friends. Right, even though we've been through all of this, honestly, we have to stick together. And so that's why they say, look, help us understand what's going on here. Because Bruce's response was like, you don't understand anything about what this is, about the bigger picture. And here's a crazy thing. Bruce starts acting very uncharacteristic, right? Almost fanatical, maniacal. Right? Where when Riddler says, Bruce, we know this Scarecrow has you thinking your life is at the center of some plot, the Batman project, but if you can just let us in, we can help debunk all of this. Bruce doesn't want their help, almost because Bruce wants to believe it's true. Technically, this is a thing called motivated reasoning, right? Which is oftentimes confused with confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is seeking out information that validates an already existing belief system, and it rejects information that does not confirm that existing belief system. Motivated reasoning is when we seek out information that confirms what we want to believe, not what we already believe. And so Bruce is kind of in this mindset of motivated reasoning, right? He wants to believe the Batman project is real. He wants to believe that like his life is all some grand manipulation by Joker and Scarecrow. And I would argue that while he doesn't necessarily go in depth into this, that a lot of it seems to be because it gives it all meaning. It gives it reason. Instead of his father just dying in a zoo due to an arbitrary shooting, right? That it actually is a motivation for why his father died. There's a motivation for why Joker and Scarecrow are taunting him, as opposed to the fact that everything that's happened, all the bad things that have taken place, is really just because he just picked the wrong gig, right? That he really did just choose to be Batman and bring all this hell, fire, and brimstone down onto the city of Gotham and even his closest friends, right? But there is also a lot of truth to this, and it's what everybody else doesn't get. Because Penguin says, right, when Bruce says, I don't want your help, Penguin says, well, you're getting it anyway, right? And so at that point, Bruce says, tell me about Greebling shipping. Ozzy. And literally, Penguin's like, what are you talking about? And Bruce says, you're smuggling routes, right? One of the trucking companies that you use is Griebling Shipping, as in Otto Griebling, a famous clown, a shell for JK Industries. That's one of Jack Grimm's corporations. And so the response of Penguin, look, man, I use like 24 shipping companies. How am I supposed to know if one of them is a shell company for another person or something like that? I don't ask questions. I just deal with the people who also don't ask questions. And so that's when Riddler, right, he says, it's true, Bruce, with today's economic realities, it's probably just a coincidence. Bruce turns to Riddler and he says, we attach processing chips, Eddie, one of the biggest sponsors of your research. Weetach, as in Charles Adrian Weetach, the clown, right? Another of Grimm's shell companies. And again, Harvey Dent is just like circumstantial at best. Now, this guy's a lawyer, right? This guy's job is to poke holes in people's theories in order to prove them wrong and prove himself right. It's not to say that he has a personal stake in this. It's simply just to try to debunk everything that Bruce is saying so they can pull him out of this conspiracy rabbit hole, right? But that's where Bruce turns to Harvey and he says, the scholarship that put you through law school, right? The M. Maurice Award, M. Maurice is an anagram for Marceau, as in Marcel Marceau, a famous clown, one more of Jack Grimm's monikers. And so at that point, it's like, so? Because in that moment, Bruce is just kind of like flabbergasted. He's like, what do you mean so? Like, what do you mean so? Like, don't you guys see what's going on here, right? Scarecrow is a master. Some people think he's more than one person, a team. His fingers are in everything. He plans for decades. And so he starts going through all of this evidence. And truth to tell, guys, it's hard to ignore. It's really hard to ignore. These are no longer the ravings of a conspiracy theorized madman, right? These are hard pieces of evidence, right? He says there's evidence that he laced the Gotham water supply years ago. They thought fluoride chemtrails, but it was crows, right? Now, that whole idea about poisoning Gotham's water supply, wouldn't it be a very interesting plan if Scarecrow, because the one thing that we've always kind of wondered, right, is that with Scarecrow being a part of this grand plan, with Clayface and all these guys, if Scarecrow is a guy who smokes a cigarette, and seemingly the chemicals from the cigarette are what basically cause people to experience fear, then why isn't it that everyone experiences that fear? Or why doesn't he experience that fear, right? Maybe he was immune to it. But how interesting would it be if Gotham's water supply was poisoned with a chemical that is one part of a two-part combination? The other part of that combo is in the cigarette, which would explain why Scarecrow can just smoke without really thinking about it in a meaningful way. But at the same time, anyone who has consumed Gotham's water supply and has the other part of the basically substance, right, the toxin in their body, when they're exposed to the smoke, then the toxin gets activated. And that's how they succumb to the influence of Scarecrow, right? That's the kind of planning and strategy that we're talking about here. And that's what Bruce says. He leaves clues, right? Threads to connect. And if my dad is alive, the location where they're holding him is in this data somewhere. And that's the core of it all, because keep in mind, Bruce was told by Scarecrow, your father's alive, and showed him a video of his father alive, right? But the question is it really his father? That's the crazy thing about this comic. So at that point, right, Waylon Jones hits him up and says, do you know how you sound right now, right? If your dad is alive, Bruce, we have to tear all of this off the wall right now. And Bruce just screams at him, right? Like, you don't understand, right? Open your eyes, the pattern is there, right? He's going crazy, right? And he says, look, the zoo map, right? If we draw a line from the bat house to where you were standing when Chill attacked, Waylon, I hit this, right? The crock pit. And that's where Waylon Jones like, what are you talking about? And Bruce says, and you, Ozzy, your body in the footage, it was turned toward the penguin enclosure. Eddie, you were nearest the monkeys, the smartest animals in the zoo. Now, Harvey, it took me longest to figure you out, but you were by the petting zoo. They kept rams there, the sacrificial favorite of Janus, the god of dualities, right? It was all in his design. But the key, the master, has to be the bats. They were imported from this jungle in Bolivia. Perfect for hiding someone. That has to be where they're keeping my dad. If I could just find one more clue as to where, some detail that I missed. But that's the crazy thing, is because everyone sees it, and you see how crazy this sounds, right? What it sounds like is, again, motivated reasoning. He's looking for every piece of evidence he can find that confirms this theory that he has. And he's rejecting every piece of evidence he hears that flies in the face of it. Because like Mulder from X-Files, he wants to believe, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about here, right? That's the thing. But everyone else seeing this considers him to be crazy. And Riddler says, Bruce, this is not a puzzle to solve. Puzzles create a whole, not more pieces. And Penguin tells him, right, like, it's a con, you moron. Everybody sees it but you. They're literally dragging you through the mud, tormenting you, screwing with your head. That's all this is. Right? It's a great big huge game. You're the one being played. You're just so caught up in it that you don't know what's actually going on. And that's where Bruce just fires back and says, no. Maybe it's because you're all in on it. And that's how you know Bruce has lost his mind, because now he's accusing the people that he should be trusting of the ones that are manipulating him. But he does offer a caveat here. He says, you're in on it whether you know it or not, right? I told you, you're compromised. I cannot trust you or anyone else until I learn the truth about how deep this goes. And the response is exactly what you would expect it to be. Right? I mean, understand something. Anybody who's ever had lifetime friends, right? Friends that I've known since high school, friends that I've known since before high school, right? When you're talking about people you've known that long and you've experienced ups and downs, you've seen them at their worst, you've seen them at their best, there's a kind of camaraderie that forms there. And there is an unbreakable bond that builds between the two of you. Lives may take you in different directions, right? Maybe they have kids and you don't. Maybe you travel the world. Maybe you have a job that takes you to the other side of the country. But at the end of the day, that connection remains. It's what makes life worth living. And it's one of the greatest things about us as people. And you know that the instant you tug on that string, they will be there to help you out, whatever it may be. That's what we're talking about here, right? These guys grew up together. They experienced literally a shooting in a zoo together, all the horror and torment that came with it. When Bruce's father was killed in that, they were there for him. When he was struggling with depression and trying to figure out what to do next, they were there for him. When they had their struggles, when Waylon Jones was fighting Bibbo Babowski and didn't think he would win, Bruce was there for him. Kind of. Not as much as he could have been, and Bruce was kind of a dick. But the point is, they've all been there in some way. And now here's Bruce Wayne looking at these people that he should trust the most and saying, I can't trust you. That's why Waylon Jones responds the way that he does. How would you respond to that? You would feel hurt. You would feel betrayed, right? And that's what they feel. And so that's why Waylon Jones says, I told them no matter what, we were all brothers, right? Talking about everybody else who's here. And he says, and so they came for you. And now you're going to stand there and you're going to tell us that we're your enemies, right? Us, all the things that we've been through, all the things we sacrificed for you. And you're going to tell us that we're the enemy. And so Bruce doesn't apologize here. He doesn't say, you know what, I'm sorry, I overreacted. That's not what happens, right? What does he do? He holds his ground. He lets his pride get the better of him. And he says, so why are you still here, Waylon Jones? And that's where his mom says, because they love you just like I do, because his mom has arrived with Alfred. Now, this is how deep down the rabbit hole Bruce has gone. And this is why I say this is uncharacteristic stuff, because what's going on here is he in turn turns on Alfred Pennyworth. Now, Alfred is sketch at best, right? This guy is not very legit. I mean, let's just be honest with ourselves. There is something a little off about this guy. He's not the kindly Alfred Pennyworth that we know, right? Like the butler that took Bruce under his wing and raised him when his parents died and that kind of stuff. This guy's like a merc, right? He's like a hardcore military guy that just kills for a living. But he's also been the guy that provides Bruce information, the kind of information he needs, right? And so when he arrives on the scene, Bruce's distrust of him, which already kind of seemed to existed, starts boiling to the surface. So he recognizes his mom, but then he says, and then you brought him here with you too? Right? He's the worst of all of them. That's right, I'm onto you, Pennyworth. You think I don't know that you've been spying on me? But then his mom starts talking him down. Right? And she says, Jim wrote me about Batman, and some part of me always knew that you were Batman, but I'm sorry that I've never been there for you the way that you needed me to be. Now, it's not as though she was an absentee mom, right? Keep in mind, unlike the main DC universe, Thomas and Martha didn't die, but they also didn't come from like wealthy Gothamite families. Right, that like Bruce's father was a teacher and his mom's a social worker. And the reality was that the job she had really required her to maximize both sides. She had to be the best she could as a social worker, which anybody in that position or that profession will tell you, it is an emotionally taxing job. I mean, that will push you to your limits. But at the same time, she had to be a mom. And it meant that she couldn't be everywhere at once. So she couldn't be everything that Bruce needed in a mother. So again, she was doing her best. It's just in some ways she fell short, which is what happens. But at the same time, she says, right, I was trying to help in my way, but I'm here now. And I'm here to tell you that all of this, it's not true. It's not real. Your life is yours, and your father is dead. Now, keep in mind, what we had seen up to this point was that Bruce's father's coffin was empty. When he went to go look up the body, it was empty. So now he is under the belief that his father was never actually buried, right? That his father was never actually dead. His father's being held by Joker and all those guys. And so that's when the response here, no, right? I see it now. Every lead points back to you, your time in the Owls. That must be where the last clue is hidden, the location, right? I need to know everything, Mom, right now. And that's the thing, is his mom says, look, I was in the Owls. That's true. Because keep in mind, the Court of Owls in the Absolute Universe were actually more like social revolutionaries, in the sense that they weren't some organization that like controls Gotham behind the scenes and are effectively bad guys. No. All that really happened here is that they were working against the forces of like Absolute Joker. Somewhere along the line, and we don't know when, Joker took the fight to them. And when that happened, basically decimated the organization to the point that it was down to a skeleton crew, and they backed off. They gave up. They realized they had bitten off way more than they could chew. I am interested in to see how that goes down and like what actually happened there, but that's when his mom says, right, yes, I was in the Owls, but the Owls weren't really a thing anymore, and I'll tell you anything that you want to know, but not now, not until you snap out of this madness. And she says, talk to me, Bruce. And that's where he says, you will tell me everything you know about the Owls. Literally puts his helmet on. And this is a symbolic thing, and I love this. You guys remember in Breaking Bad when you would have those moments where Walter White would stop being Walter White and would become Heisenberg for a brief moment? It was kind of like this middle ground in the show when he was fluctuating back and forth between the two, and like Anakin falling to the dark side and becoming Vader, he full on became Heisenberg. That's what's happening here. It's almost like Bruce Wayne has two different personalities, right? There's Bruce as we know him, and then there's when he's Batman. And when he's Batman in pursuit of something, nothing gets in his way. He starts freaking out on his mom. He doesn't personally attack her, but he just starts like punching the wall around her, and he gets violent because she won't give him the information that he wants to hear. It looks like he's having a psychotic break. He is totally immersed in all of this, and it's defining him now. And so at that point, everybody literally tries to grab him and calm him down. And he just says, dude, tell me what you know, or so help me God, and almost threatens to attack her. And at that point, Alfred fires a shot that neutralizes him. It doesn't kill him, right? It's just enough to basically stun him. And so that's where his mom's like, don't hurt him, right? And Alfred just says, stay down, kid. And at that point, Bruce takes off. But that's when you realize the bigger picture he's looking at here, all these images on the wall, they come in the shape of Absolute Scarecrow's face, right? That's how far down this rabbit hole he's gone here. And so that begins to take us into the whole revelation of Clayface. Although, if you've been paying attention so far, we've already seen him. You just didn't realize it. That's why I went through all of that in the first place, right? One, because it's important, but two, because we've already seen him. You're just not aware that we've seen him. And so at that point, you jump over to the Robins, right? Now keep in mind, the Robins are basically like a paramilitary force led by Deathstroke for the purpose of like taking out Batman. So they're not his sidekicks, not the way that we're used to. Now, one of the things that we didn't talk about here is that Jason Todd and Tim Drake end up going out on patrol. Just because, as we've established so far in the Absolute Batman line, Jason Todd is pretty hardcore, much like he is in the main DC universe, right? Like this guy wants to find Batman, and there is no limit to how far he will push himself in order to do it. He initially invited everybody to come on patrol, but at the end of the day, they were just kind of like, look, man, the suits are drained, right? We were already on patrol, like we have no desire to go back out and to try to find Batman. But again, Jason Todd is a believer, and this guy will do whatever he needs to do in order to try to capture Batman. And so what ends up going on here is that once he gets around, right, and this just amazing giant mech, which I still absolutely adore, right? He's like Robin 2 reporting in, right? Checked out scattered accounts of basically somebody dressed as Batman with a battle axe. There's nothing here, so it just sounds like it's some punk kids. But then it turns out it is Batman, because he's just like standing right there, ready for Jason Todd, right? And he tells him, I'm not here to fight. But Jason doesn't believe him, because Jason has experienced betrayal in his own individual past, right? More so than that, though, this guy takes his job very seriously. And so that's where he's just like, sure, yeah, I believe you, Batman. You're not here for a fight. That's fun, right? So he ends up basically firing off these devices that ensnare Batman. They subdue him. And then Jason Todd's just like relishing in the whole thing. He's like, wait, I got him? I got Batman? Holy cow, like, dude, I got Batman. Oh my God, right? I can't believe it, right? He's just like celebrating on it all. And he even says, right, me, Jason, up from nothing, the bad apple, right? But here I am, the guy who saved Gotham from Batman. And that's when Tim Drake shows up, right? Because Tim Drake ended up taking him up on the offer. It seemed like he would, because Tim was saying, hey, look, we are a team. We are supposed to work together. And that's where Jason's like, oh my God, like you actually showed up. Dope, right? And the funny thing about this is that as the two of them start going back and forth, one of the things that we've learned here is that unlike the Robins that we're traditionally used to, which despite Jason Todd being very much an anti-hero and a dick more often than he's not, at the end of the day, he does for the most part try to do the right thing. He has morally questionable ways of doing it, and Under the Red Hood is a perfect example of that. But at the end of the day, right, he does oftentimes try to do the right thing. He's a good guy at heart, right, for the most part. Unlike the main DC universe where that's the case, here in the Absolute universe, it's almost kind of like The Boys to a degree, right? They care about how they're rating in the polls. They care about their public perception. At least most of them do. Dick Grayson's the only one who doesn't really seem to care. He really seems like a believer, right? He's actually in this to try to make Gotham City better, as opposed to caring about his ego like so many other members of the team do. And so that's where they talk about how, hey, so like Dick Grayson's at the bottom of the rankings. Honestly, we should just like kind of take a video or a photo and then like send it to him, right? Just kind of rub it in, make it sting a little bit more. The problem is that while they're going back and forth about all of this, the crows show up. And that's where Batman starts to realize, okay, like there's something bigger here. Not only that, there is a kind of clay that's coming over the entirety of Jason Todd's mech. And they don't see it happening, right? They don't see that it's taking place. They're too caught up in themselves, right? And what happens? Clayface takes on the form of Batman, literally takes on the form of Batman, and immediately attacks both of them on the spot, right? And when that happens, they try to subdue him as best they can. They fight back as best they can, but there's nothing they can do. The whole time, Batman begs, right? Like, don't you dare, right? Do not kill them. Like, please take me instead. But the whole time, Clayface mocks everything he says, right? No, don't you dare, right? Please take me instead. He almost kind of seems subhuman, right? In the sense that like he just mirrors the speech of the people around him. And so in that moment, he just like encases Jason Todd and Tim Drake. And in that moment, Jason Todd's incapacitated, he's knocked out, and Tim Drake killed on the spot. He gets killed by Clayface. Just like that, he literally gets impaled with all these spikes that come flying out of him. And so in that moment, Batman snaps, right? You killed him. And what does Clayface say? You killed him, right? Batman calls Clayface a monster. Clayface says the same thing, right? Monster. And the two of them start fighting back and forth with one another. Now, as you guys know, a fight with Clayface is no easy thing. You have to know exactly how Clayface's powers work in order to be able to overcome him. Bruce is encountering him for the very first time. So literally he is fighting a guy who is malleable, who can dodge shots, who can let the axe go right through him and just immediately reconstitute himself. There's no easy way to win this, right? He can increase his density, right? So he can make himself stronger effectively. Bruce isn't prepared for this. Every hit with the axe, every kick, every punch, every single attack goes right through Clayface. And Batman doesn't know how to overcome him, right? He doesn't know how to beat this guy. He cuts off the head of Clayface. And what happens? The body keeps going because Clayface is just one gigantic singular being, right? And so Batman says, I told you to take me instead. And what does Clayface say? I am taking you, because he's taking everything that Batman is. He's taking his identity, his life, the whole 9 yards. And so literally the two of them go to attack one another. And what happens? Clayface just totally starts to ensnare Batman, like to encase him. Now Batman does escape, but this is a warning shot. That's all this is a warning shot. Nothing more, nothing less. It's basically Scarecrow and Joker saying, if you thought Bane was bad, we have guys that work for us that do things that you couldn't possibly imagine, that you cannot overcome, that you cannot beat, right? And so literally Clayface just goes to leave. And Batman says, you don't get to leave. And Clayface says, no, you don't get to leave ever, and goes down into the sewer system. And so in that moment, Batman runs over to Tim Drake, right? Picks up his body, which is a very reminiscent shot of the events of Death in the Family, right? The old school Jim Starlin story where Jason Todd originally died. And then at that point, Absolute Batman hears the whistling of Scarecrow. And Scarecrow just says, damn shame, right? So young too. But I guess it was bound to happen eventually, Batman. See you around. And then he just walks away, because in that moment, Jason Todd is waking up. And what does Jason Todd say, right? You killed him. Right? He immediately blames Batman for the death of Tim Drake. And how could he not? How could he not? From his perspective, it was Batman who killed Tim Drake. So it's not one of these things where he's like reworking all the events that happened in his head in order to justify his hatred of Batman. No, he's going with what his eyes saw, right? And Bruce just says, no, right? No, that was not me. But Tim Drake is lying at his feet. And as far as Jason's concerned, it was Bruce. And so he tells him, right? You are going to pay for this, Batman. Do you hear me? This is not over, because now you have to die. You killed one of ours. And so now we're going to take your life. That's the response of Jason Todd. And so at that point, the cops show up, right? All units, we have a man down. Repeat, we have a man down. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. There is a little bit to this story that we didn't necessarily cover, but that's because we're going to circle back to it in the next issue, because it's definitely going to play into the events that come next. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.